think. Today we'll be looking at these icons of extreme wealth who are surprising paragons of frugality, or to put it a bit more bluntly, the top 10 cheapest billionaires on Earth. With a reported net worth north of $17 billion, Charlie Ergen is the richest person in Colorado. He got his start selling satellite dishes out of the back of his truck, eventually parlaying this small business into Dish Network, itself one of the most notoriously frugal businesses in America. Strangely, in his youth, he was known to be an aficionado of gambling, but in his personal and professional life, Ergen is rather adverse to taking financial risks. As president and CEO of Dish Network, he runs the company with an iron fist, at one time requiring employees to clock in with fingerprint scanners, and he's known for publicly humiliating executives who have the gall to be even a few minutes late for meetings. But he certainly can't be accused of flaunting his wealth. To this day, Ergen forgoes dining out for lunch in favor of bringing sandwiches from home in brown paper bags, just like we used to in middle school. He never even flies first class, preferring to save cash by flying coach, even though he could afford a fleet of private planes. Employees may not always agree with his management style, but even they have to admire his dedication to avoiding reckless spending. Ergen claims that his frugal ways save him thousands of dollars every year. Easily the richest man in Mexico, Carlos Slim Helu built his fortune in telecom before delving into retail among many other arenas. He owns more than 200 companies, including Telmex, Mexico's largest phone service provider, and he has more than once sat atop Forbes' list of the richest people in the world, with an estimated net worth of over $70 billion. Such wealth should be associated with multi-million-dollar mansions, chauffeured limousines, and high-end tailored suits, exactly none of which are part of Helu's lifestyle. He's known to live in the same modest home he's owned for over 30 years, and spends most of his downtime not jet-setting around the globe, but living a quiet domestic life with his children and grandchildren. Most of his clothes are purchased right off the rack from one of the many retail outlets which he owns. And even in a country where the wealthy are often targets for roving criminals, Helu still drives himself wherever he goes. Even more strangely, despite being quite tech-savvy, he doesn't own a computer. He prefers to do his own accounting and correspondence by hand, with a paper ledger. He's been called one of the most astute investors on the planet, and he has the personal fortune to back it up. But even if he intends to buy your company, he'll still show up to the meeting in his own car, wearing a cheap name brand suit. Jim Walton is the youngest son of Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart, which automatically puts him in some very wealthy company. He presides over Walton Enterprises, which holds $90 billion worth of Walmart stock and also manages several smaller companies. His personal net worth is right around $40 billion, and you'd expect him to make his residence in some posh location on one of America's coasts. But Jim prefers a different way of life. He makes his home in the tiny town of Bentonville, Arkansas, with a population of less than 50,000, the very small town where the first Walmart opened in 1970. Jim still puts in long, hard work days at a nondescript office building in Bentonville, administering the family business with the help of about 20 employees. He drives to work in a rusty old Dodge Dakota pickup truck, usually the first to arrive and the last to leave. His employees all agree that none of them would ever want his job, because the man simply works too hard. Not exactly typical of the youngest billionaire in a family full of them. But in the words of former Walmart CEO David Glass, Jim is just like his father. He likes to get things done. British telecom mogul John Caldwell is far from the richest on our list, with a personal net worth of about $2.4 billion. The founder of Phones for You, he gained most of his fortune by selling his 85% share in his telecom company in 2005. But the sudden wealth wasn't enough to make him change his frugal ways. Speaking with the Daily Mail, Caldwell said, "I was brought up to be frugal, and it's definitely a factor in my success. I was born in the 50s, which was a frugal era, and my family had to be very careful with money out of necessity." Caldwell was once known to ride his bike 14 miles to go to work every day, and he also has a taste for cheap suits. He once told Forbes, "I don't need Savile Row suits. I don't need to spend money to bolster my own esteem." He even cuts his own hair rather than spending money on a barber, which is pushing the frugality envelope quite a bit for the man who is known as the UK's single biggest taxpayer. You might think that the world's richest retailer would be named Walton, but it's not the case. That title goes to Amancio Ortega, a Spanish businessman who is best known as the owner of Zara, a European clothing chain which is a subsidiary of Inditex, the world's largest retailer of apparel. Ortega is worth nearly $70 billion, so his employees could be forgiven for being a bit puzzled to see the multi-billionaire tycoon sitting down to eat lunch with them in the company cafeteria. Ortega still lives in the same small Spanish town in which he was raised, and is a familiar face to local residents. But perhaps most surprisingly, he is one of the few people in Spain, and maybe all of Europe, who never wears his own brand. In fact, he wears the same old suit to work every day, and rather than retreating into a spacious private office, he can more often be seen right on the factory floor, going over new products with his designers. By some accounts, he's the second richest man in the world, yet he goes about his business the same way he always has, with a modest image and a personal touch. You may not expect to see one of your college professors on this list, but if you happen to study computer engineering at Stanford, prepare for a surprise. Professor David Cheriton has a personal net worth of over $6 billion, but he didn't amass his fortune by saving all of his paychecks. Like many billionaires, he made a series of very savvy investments. He was among the very first investors in a scrappy little internet startup called Google, and since that initial venture, he has provided funding for over 20 successful tech companies. Sheridan shares a lot of his most frugal traits with his fellow cheap billionaires. He cuts his own hair, only flies coach, and prefers jeans and a t-shirt to expensive designer clothes. When he's not riding his bicycle around his Palo Alto neighborhood, he can be seen behind the wheel of a 1986 Volkswagen sedan. But on top of all of this, he offers one money-saving tip that seems a little excessive for anyone, let alone an initial investor in one of the most successful companies on earth. He claims that he reuses his tea bags. Call us crazy, Professor Sheridan, but we can all likely agree that you've earned a full-flavored cup of tea, and buying a new box every week probably won't break the bank. Wipro is one of India's top tech companies, boasting clients as formidable as Microsoft, Sony, and Nokia. It began in the 1940s as a manufacturer of cooking oil, but transforming it into the international juggernaut that it is today took more than luck and business acumen. It took the insane frugality of Chairman Azim Premji, a man who has been described as making Uncle Scrooge look like Santa Claus. Even though his $16 billion fortune would allow him to be completely hands-off, he still administers the day-to-day dealings of Wipro down to the smallest, most ridiculous detail. He's known to monitor how many rolls of toilet paper are being used by his employees, and is always at the ready to remind workers to turn off the lights when they leave for the day. And in his personal life, his financial habits are no more exorbitant. He drives a battered old Toyota, which is actually a step up from the battered old Ford Escort he drove previously. When he's not in the mood to drive, he's known to jump on one of the three-wheeled rickshaws ubiquitous in major Indian cities. The so-called bare-bones billionaire also refuses to fly in luxury, taking economy-class flights to all of his near-daily business meetings around the globe. But when it comes to philanthropy, Premji can be coaxed to loosen his wallet. He's donated tens of millions of dollars to charity, established a university, and created a foundation to help Indians land high-paying jobs. Mark Zuckerberg needs no introduction. Despite a very recent public grilling before Congress in regards to Russian meddling in the 2016 US election, he continues to be the familiar face of Facebook, the monolithic social network which he helped found. With a $70 billion fortune, he's known to splurge on real estate. He owns a $7 million home in Palo Alto, among many other holdings. But for one of the richest men in the US, Zuckerberg has consistently shown an aversion to the other trappings of wealth. He's not exactly known for being a snappy dresser, usually being seen in basic name-brand clothes. And if cars are the ultimate status symbol, it appears Zuckerberg couldn't care less about status. He drives to work at the sprawling Facebook campus every day in a 2014 VW hatchback with a manual transmission, which even fully loaded would have only set him back about $30,000. However, Zuckerberg has also been known to put his money where his mouth is when it comes to philanthropy. He's literally donated billions of dollars to charitable causes, and even some of his real estate holdings, such as 2 properties on the Hawaiian island of Kauai, worth $100 million, were purchased with an eye toward preservation rather than development. With a net worth over $82 billion, serial investor Warren Buffett has long jockeyed for positions atop the Forbes list of the world's richest people. One of the most successful investors to ever walk the earth, Buffett is the chairman and CEO of Berkshire Hathaway, a holding company which owns outright far too many American businesses for us to list, plus owns shares in numerous other companies across a dazzling array of industries from banking to airlines. You'd expect him to live in the kind of luxury that would put rock stars and professional athletes to shame, but of course you'd be dead wrong. In 1958, Buffett bought a 5-bedroom house in Omaha, Nebraska for $31,500, and incredibly, he lives there still. Rather than have his breakfast prepared by 5-star chefs, he'll usually stop at McDonald's for a cheap meal on his 5-minute drive to work. Not only does he drive used cars, he searches for vehicles on which he can get the best deal, like those that have been damaged by hail. He shuns the jet-set vacation lifestyle in favor of quiet evenings strumming his ukulele or playing bridge, and dresses more like a high school principal than the world's most successful investor. But like most of the richest of the rich, he has dedicated a great deal of his resources to charitable endeavors. In 2010, he was a co-signer on the Gates-Buffett Giving Pledge, promising to donate at least half of his wealth to charity. Along with Zuckerberg, the pledge was also signed by perhaps the only man with wealth to rival Buffett's, and who is also just as famously cheap. Microsoft founder Bill Gates is the richest man in America and a longtime friend of Warren Buffett, who has apparently adopted the Supreme Investor's frugal philosophy. He may own several cars and live in a lavish home, but some of his quirkier habits betray the fact that he didn't amass his $82 billion fortune by throwing his money around. In keeping with Microsoft policy, Gates spent years flying coach to even the most high-stakes business meetings. At one media event, he revealed that the wristwatch he was wearing at the time only cost $10. Like Buffett, he's pledged to donate at least half his fortune to charity. But also like Buffett, he has a fondness for that cheapest of fast food joints, McDonald's. In a letter to his friend which was made public, Gates reminisced about the time the two billionaires stopped off for a bite at a Hong Kong McDonald's, a meal for which Buffett generously offered to pay with coupons.